Siufung, welcome to this podcast. So to begin with, can you tell us, for example, who you are, some of your background information, for example, because this is a project about marginality and resilience during COVID-19. So for example, what makes you a marginal figure or anything else, for example, your age or even your interests, basically anything.
So I'm Siufung. I identified as gender fluid. Right now I'm doing advocacy on basically gender fluidity and transgender rights. So I'm also a professional female bodybuilder. So that could be my professional career maybe in the future. So I'm also doing academic research, and I'm upcoming a PhD candidate at a university in the US. So I am 31 right now. And I have been basically born and raised in Hong Kong.
Okay, so you mentioned your name first. So maybe let me start by asking something about your name, Siufung.
Sure.
Guess what? This name has become kind of like an icon, or at least a name quite familiar with a lot of LGBT population in Hong Kong. So can you tell us something about your name, Siufung? Now, I myself have known you for like almost a decade, but our audience or listeners here may not know about that. So tell us about that.
Yeah, Siufung is not my born name. So it's a name, you can say, it originally came from a pen name. So I have been writing poetry when I was like teenage. When I was a teenage and up till right now I still am writing poetry, but I write much more less. But when I wrote poetry, when I was writing in Cantonese, in Chinese, you need to have a pen name.
Right.
So I was making up a pen name, and at the same time, during that time when I was in teenage, it was popular within the LGBT community that you always call yourself with Siu. So Siufung is actually literal translation is small and wind.
Wind, right?
Yeah. So wind in classic Chinese poetry, it does have a very poetic meaning.
Right.
So it does mean having this kind of influence. And I was humble, and because of at that time as I said, the LGBT community was actually very they love to use everything with small. So like whatever to make it more cute, I think. So I was combining these two. So I actually made a pen name of myself as small and wind. So a little bit of influence. So not too arrogant about myself. So that was actually initially my pen name. Whenever I read poetry, whenever I publish poetry, I would use this name. And then eventually, I didn't remember exactly the reason why, but eventually I thought, this name looks pretty good. And people start to call me, because my last name is Law, so people start to call me Law Siufung, right? So, and I thought, it sounds pretty good. So I just keep using that. So when I started doing advocacy, I started to call myself Siufung. So my name, I've been changing my name for quite a few times. And I think this name is, and always people ask, do you have an English name, right? So I think Siufung is actually my English name. And I also love, retaining the kind of Cantonese-ness, right? In my own, in my name. So that's why I insist of having no, English name, but using a literal translation of my Cantonese name into English. So so that was where my name comes from.
Yeah. Good, interesting, because actually one of the reasons why I am asking this is I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast might not belong to the Hong Kong population. So because this podcast supposedly will go to hopefully all over the world. So wow, good.
Yeah, I also always encounter this. Like whenever I meet like foreigners or people who do not understand Cantonese, there are always like funny things happen. So for example, they can never pronounce my name correctly.
I know some Siufung.
Yeah, Siufung, right?
Siufung I think Siufung is kind of common, right?
Yeah. So Siufung is actually from an English, a woman like a classic singer, right? So so people did. I did preface, especially those who don't understand Cantonese.
Right.
So they can't understand the kind of like the difference between Siufung and Siufung, right? So they will use Siufung, right? It happens sometimes, and sometimes people just assert that it was Siufung was two names. It's like Siu is my English name, is my name, and then Feng is like my last name. So they would call me Siu. So they would call me Siu sometimes.
I see.
And eventually I kind of accept that.
Okay.
Because I think sometimes it's difficult for people to remember two vowels.
Right.
So it's actually better to just, to let them call whatever they feel comfortable with.
Okay.
And as long as I can recognize them, it's fine.
Okay.
So I think that's interesting, like,
Yeah, it
especially
is.
in the, and I always encounter people who would ask me, what is your English name, right? And I said, this is my English name, and then I don't know how to pronounce it.
Okay.
Right? So I mean, in the process, you also make them, ask people to actually try to learn, some of the Cantonese sounds, right? So I think that is also something good.
Okay. All right, now, so going back to another characteristics of your character, which is when you introduce yourself, you call yourself a gender fluid. Can you elaborate on that?
So gender fluid is a kind of gender identity. So it's about how you feel about yourself, right? And it is not something that it doesn't really need to. You don't really need to change your body or whatever. So it's a gender identity that we do not want to conform into the binary system of female and male.
Right.
So for example, I do see myself as neither completely woman nor completely man.
Right.
So some people might see themselves in a more androgynous, more ambiguous way, and some would say, I identified as gender fluid and see myself as both a man and a woman. So for me, it's neither man nor woman. So, and sometimes I would also use that. I mean, I also feel like sometimes I'm in that in betweenness, right? And I always believe that everyone has this quality of both being masculine and feminine.
Right.
So sometimes I would say in a very radical way of thinking, every one of us are gender fluid, right? It's more like we kind of choose to become a cultural man or cultural woman.
Right.
So that's kind of my more as my my philosophy. But so being in gender fluid, and that does not necessarily need to have a specific kind of gender expression.
Right.
So unlike it's a huge debate. So are we transgender, right? So these are something we are still discussing and arguing that in our community today. And we had this argument since I started to do advocacy on gender fluid. And we are still arguing today about whether gender fluid should be considered as a gender identity under this transgender umbrella.
Right.
So if we understand transgender in a very broad way, right, it's an umbrella term that actually includes, a very broad idea of transgender is anyone who do not feel aligned with their, assigned sex at birth. So basically, it's very broad, right? So. I do understand transgender as an umbrella term, especially coming from this with an academic background.
Right,
so I do see it as an umbrella term. But in local activism, right, some activists might not see it that way. So they might see it as seeing transgender as straightly people who do undergo physical transition, right, to become the gender that they want to be. So so it means always female to male or male to female. So it's changing right now though, but there is still this kind of very instilled kind of idea of what transgender is and is not within our community. So I would say, for me, I would say gender fluid is a little bit different from very traditional binary kind of transgender, in which we have a very diverse way of expressing our gender. So as I said, some people might identify in a more androgynous or ambiguous way of gender. So meaning that they might not see themselves. Meaning they might dress up in a more androgynous way, and some might. And their gender expression might not change, right? And some might change according to maybe how they feel. For me, my gender expression does change according to different circumstances. So for example, when I have to compete as a woman on stage, then I will be happily wearing a bikini, doing my hair, my makeup, or I'm upcoming doing a few more. One more actually, but I have been doing one last week on a photography shooting, and then I have to wear my wig, put on my makeup, wearing heels, bikini on and then photo shooting on the street. So I'm happy with that kind of more feminine gender expression.
Right.
If I am in that particular circumstance, right? So, but at the in a more socialized way, normal day, typical day like this, so you can see my gender expression is more inclined to be more masculine. Because of various reasons. One of it is very practical. It's because basically it's easier to get clothes in the men's attire than in the women's attire. So even men's attire, sometimes I cannot get the right size. Especially the pants or trousers that are too tight for me. But in any case, the women clothes, especially women clothes in Asia, is designed really, for really slim women.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not. I mean, that goes back to the body image, and we can only talk about that for 2 hours. But then that, again, that is, that makes me really hard to dress up more femininely in public, in socialization. So that's why I feel like it's more comfortable being more masculine looking, whenever I am, in a usual social setting.
Right. Okay, now, so much about your image in terms of your body, masculinity, femininity, etc. Let's go into your bodybuilding profession and also how it is related to and also affected by COVID-19. Now, I know you yourself is a bodybuilder and also you are a gym trainer. So tell us first, when COVID-19 struck us, what will be some of the immediate difficulties or challenges that you have as a professional trainer and also as a bodybuilder?
Of course, it hits me a lot, right? So let me first talk about, as a bodybuilder myself, right? So especially as a professional bodybuilder, you just don't go to the gym for casual, right? So really you go to the gym for training. But in Hong Kong, we all know that spaces are limited. It's really hard to build up a garage gym like what we see in the West. So we have really limited spaces. There are very limited spaces that we can go for our workout. Not all the gyms are built for bodybuilders. Most gyms are built for functional training, not really heavyweight, hardcore weight training. And for me, I'm a machine lover, so I love doing gym. I love working out with machines. I love trying out, experimenting with different machines. So for me, when COVID came, right, it really hits me a lot because I have to go back to very, very traditional kind of, using all the dumbbells, barbells, right? So I actually spent quite a lot of money to build my home gym.
Okay.
So I actually try my best to get the weights, to get barbells, to get some dumbbells, so I can, or even resistance band. I remember at the very beginning of COVID, you can hardly get a resistant band.
Yeah, I know that. People are fighting for that. I remember that. Yeah.
And nowhere can you buy one. You have to wait. I have to wait for almost 2 months. And then I have to buy from everywhere. So I actually buy expensive stuff from eBay. Yeah,
order online, right? Yeah.
And all different online platforms. So just try your very best to get something. When I remember when the first wave of COVID. And I remember, because I used to train at least 5 times a week at the gym. So, the first wave of COVID hit me the most, especially because I had to stop training. I never really stopped training. Even when I travel, I do train, maybe less seriously, but I always train. So my record was not training for maybe a week entirely, since I do bodybuilding. So I had to stop training for almost a month when COVID came.
Right.
So it was maybe more than a month because you have to wait for the dumbbells. You have
and
to
all the gyms were closed down.
Then you back the dumbbells and the gyms are closed. You have nowhere to work out suddenly. And our spaces are so limited. I have to negotiate with my flatmate with spaces, right? So I have to find things that are actually, more, portable in a sense, smaller in size, so that it won't be, occupying too much space in an already small apartment. So those are really hard, right? As a professional bodybuilder,
right.
And I think it doesn't only happen to me. right? I'm lucky. I'm lucky in a sense that I was not preparing for a contest. So some of my friends were originally at the beginning stage of their preparation of a contest. That actually didn't happen, right, at all on the first year of COVID. So they were actually, starting to train hard. They've been doing cardios. Maybe they have been prepping for a month or so, and it was a harsh, preparation always for contest prep.
Right.
And then they have to stop studying, and then they don't know even when will their next contest, right? So for them emotionally, it would be also very chaotic. For me, I was a bit lucky because I was not planning to compete anyway on 2020. So I prepared to take a year rest, so I could just stop training, have a little bit of fun at home. Actually not fun, but at least some rest outside the gym. So but yes, that was pretty hard for me, and it took me around the third wave of lockdown that I can develop a gym system at home that I felt more comfortable, that I can really do something, right? So I remember, but even though I have the equipment that I think I need, I can only have like 50% of my usual training at most. So yeah, so that was hard. And of course, as a personal trainer at the gym, it strikes me in terms of not only losing your clients, right?
Okay.
Your clients will get lazy because of COVID.
Yeah.
When they get lazy, not because of COVID already, but because of COVID, they have the excuse. And really, it's really hard for them to train, and not all of them are so dedicated to buy stuff at home. If they have some resistance band, it's already very advanced for a lot of beginners, right? And so it was hard. I lose some of my clients, definitely. They never come back, and they get used to just eating, resting, Netflixing at home, and then it's really hard to get them back to the gym. Especially like we have been locking, we have a few waves of lockdowns, right? So even though when it's open up, for a month or so, they're afraid to go to the gym, because of, like my father, I've been training my father as well. So my father, before the gym, we have been training regularly at the gym, really. But because he also have diabetes, so he was afraid to come back to the gym, and he never come back, until now. So I'm trying to make him, to do some home workout, right? But I'm not living with them, so basically, it's really hard to monitor them, monitor him, right? So and then he just get back to the shape before going to the gym.
I see.
Yeah, and he refused to go to the gym as well. He said, those are not for me. You're not there. Things like that, right? So and then he said it's dangerous. You can get COVID. And stuff like that. All kinds of excuses, right? So it's hard to to get them moving once they get lazy. Especially alongside with COVID. Some people lose their job. Some people not lose their motivation, and they might not be able to come back to the gym as well. So in terms of that, in terms of the number of clients you do really see, financially, right? It would actually, cause a really, I'm lucky I'm not doing that as my career, so it's just my hobby, most likely. So I'm not too care about the financial income for my gym training part. But I know some of my friends who are, they're just they're not only freelancing trainers, but they're full-time trainers, right? And not all of them own their own gym, so sometimes they have to go to different big gyms, commercial gyms, and then they have maybe they sign up for some that kind of and then because of the close down of the gyms, right? So basically you have no income. So I have friends who have no income for I don't know, half a year or
more than that.
Right. So and eventually some of my friends open their own gym because
I heard at least one story like this.
It's a lot of stories. I have like at least 5 to 10 friends opening their gyms in these 2 years. So also because of the rent, right? The rent is lower, and it's actually easier and cheaper to get machines right now. And with a small space, you don't actually need a lot of equipment. And I have at least 5 to 10 friends. Upcoming open gym or has opened a gym. Just because of COVID. So I think that's another story. And I think it's also something good because you have more people being more, they can just pick their own stuff that they like. They have their own space to train, people to train their clients or train themselves. So I think that is also some kind of a good phenomenon out of COVID. But I can also see a lot of people who are not, maybe even if you have to open a gym, you have to have money, right? So not all of them are financially equipped enough, right, to open a gym, to buy all these expensive equipments, to pay the rent. So some of them just lose their job, right? And some gyms close down as well, right? So they also lose their job permanently. So I think that could be a pretty big damage, right, to some of the trainers in Hong Kong.
But at least I can tell there's at least a silver lining that some people are trying to cope with the negative side of COVID by, for example, opening the gym. Now, it's really interesting that the way you narrate it is quite positive, I have to say, which really echoes to your character being very positive. But I really have to ask, is there a kind of a moment that you felt really distressed, you felt there's a sense of a loss of hope, and that you are too overwhelmed that you didn't really know what to do?
Of course, I think everyone underwent that kind of period, especially for me at the beginning of COVID, where I had to stop. I was forced to stop training. My body seems like I had forced to move around, and actually, you just stay at home literally, right? Because I was also teaching at the university, so basically everything is online. I mean even now, right? Most of them are online. So actually, you're stuck at home at a really and it's in a small apartment, and then all this stress will be coming up, not only because of whether you have a job in the future, but it's also because of the inability, right, to do things that you have always been doing. So you have to change your lifestyle, altogether because of COVID. And not to say, at the beginning of COVID, we were all very stressful about getting masks, getting enough, not detergent. What is it? Detergent.
The sanitizers.
The sanitizers, right? And all these things, right? Even tissue paper. I was so struggled that I have to ask my dad at home to buy me some tissue paper. So I was bringing two rolls of tissue paper from Jordan back to Taiwan in the MTR, and I was afraid people would just chase after me with the toilet paper. So it was all stressful times. There were stressful times that I felt not completely losing hope, but I would feel depressed. I would feel like I can do nothing about it, right? I'm not sure what we can do and how long will that last, right? I'm also afraid of getting really contracting COVID, unknowingly, and of course you would also be very highly sensitive to people, and then you start to avoid a lot of physical contact, right, with people that we used to have much more when we're socializing with in events, at parties or whatever, right? So in the gym,
not to mention
I don't miss talking to people at the gym, right? Exchanging knowledge, just gossiping sometimes, all these things, right? So I could be really depressed, for a while for me.
So how about your advocacy work during COVID? How was it affect, and what kind of mechanism or ways of coping that you tried to adapt?
I remember in 2020, right? Basically, usually, June is the Pride Month, right? So I do a lot of gender advocacy on, gender fluidity and transgender rights. So I remember in 2020, in June, there was nothing. I don't recall a particular event. I used to, my June is used to filled with all sorts of events,
Yep.
Ranging from, public lecturing to, whatever guest speaker in different, maybe in schools, in the public event, or maybe in corporates, stuff like that, right?
Lots of programs, lots of activities.
Yes, yes. And I remember my June was always filled up really quickly,
Right.
For all these kinds of events. And I remember like 2020 was maybe the only year that my June was so free. There was nothing. I don't even remember that was June. I don't really recall, June has passed already. So, and nothing happened, right? You hear nothing about from the LGBT community. I actually did not recall any event at all. So that was, that invited me. The advocacy work, definitely, right, was hindered because of the COVID, right? And everyone was not, it's also because of what's happening, right, in Hong Kong in general, that people kind of lose that, I won't say interest, but people simply are focusing on other stuff, right, about Hong Kong, rather than, particularly on LGBT issues. So I felt like, everyone's attention was kind of distracted, right? So people were not so interested in talking about LGBT rights and stuff like that in June, right, in 2020. So, at that time I felt like, oh, so it's so fragile, right? So, if there are not big corporates, if there's no such big events, or, if there's no Pride Month, so to say, right? Simply people are not particularly interested, right? In talking about issues about that as well. So, that also constitutes some of my depression, right? Especially at the beginning. So, and not to say that I'm very used to doing, a lot of like public sharing, public events, meeting people, talking to people, maybe sometimes inspiring people, and all this all cut, right, because of COVID. Eventually we start to do something more online.
Online, yep.
But then online, there's also a limitation, right? It's also a possibility and limitation, but the limitation is that, you really don't see people face to face, right? It's very similar to teaching, right? So teaching online, of course, is not bad, but it's not as good as having like face-to-face contact, right? In face-to-face, you really can, look at the people, look at your student, or look at your audience, right? And then how they feel, whether something hits them, or something that I can elaborate more. But online, everyone is, sometimes they don't even open camera, right? So, everything, you just see, you just talk, you feel like you're just talking to yourself, right? So it's a very different way of interacting with people. And honestly, I don't feel like I can adapt to online, sharing. I'm very used to doing online events, but then if I can choose, I would always prefer having physical contact. Not to say the most valuable times is usually after your official talk, after your official sharing. People come up to you, and sometimes they ask for help, sometimes they just share their insights with you. Sometimes sometimes they brighten my day, right? Sometimes they will say, they will tell me their story, or sometimes their stories are so inspiring that they also brighten myself. And all these, right, you cannot have it. If you're doing a webinar online, it's just strictly 1 hour talking, and then there's not even Q&A section, right? You don't even know who are talking, in a particular setting, and then it's highly controlled, which is, I think, is also good in a way, because it also make it anonymous, so people who are afraid to be shown, to be visible, they can also join all these events to know more. So I think for the younger generation, it could be something good as well. So as I said, it's both limitation and possibilities. In terms of possibilities, I think that I remember I was the ambassador of Pink Dot, Hong Kong. So, and we did it all online, on streaming. Of course, some of them we pre-recorded it, and some of them was live on that day. The performance and stuff like that were live, and then it was all able, it was accessible on the same night. And I think that, events like Pink Dot on streaming online could actually encourage, especially young generation who are still struggling with their identity, who might not be able to come out, physically. They might be they can be accessible. They are they can access to the online streaming and to understand different topics. And not to say usually when we go Pink Dot we can only go focus on one area. If you go to the if you go into the band and the musical, then you will miss all this like educational stuff. And put everything online, you can always go back and watch it again and stuff like that. So I think that would also create more voices, right? And then allow everything be recorded. You can go back, refer to it later. You can watch it later. It can also be it can also reach out to more people, especially I think younger people who might be more prone to using online and internet. So I think these are also some possibilities to be able to widen our audience, right? Who was limited to people who were only able to come out.
It's really interesting and actually pleasant to know that in terms of both your profession and also advocacy work, you have been very resilient throughout COVID. So my question will be, have you got any new discovery throughout this process? Or have you got some new tactics in terms of caring for yourself as well as others during and after COVID?
That's a really good question. So I would say let me talk about new discovery later on. But the new techniques that I really learned is definitely all this online stuff, right?
Right.
So one of the things, so as I said earlier, so because of COVID, in terms of personal training, it actually it's really hard for you to actually conduct one-to-one, physical personal training. So what I have been doing was to be keeping contact with my friends and clients, my students, online. So we'll be conducting online. We are trying different kinds of stuff, like online training, really online by opening our Zoom,
Right.
and then we just, I just demonstrate some, maybe at home workout, and then I make private at home videos for those who would want to know how to, improve with very limited equipment. So I think those are really, new techniques I learned, right? How to cope with, the new COVID rules, right now, in which a lot of times we might be limited to just, online, without, physical contact. And I'm also getting more used to, for example, talking to people, on an online platform.
Right.
And of course it's not as good as having physical contact, but I'm more used to the kind of skills that I can manage to incite or maybe sometimes just inspire people to talk more with you. And sometimes I feel like with an online system they can ask questions that they're not used to ask in public.
Yep.
So I think that is also something something valuable, something good that came out from this COVID experience. In terms of new discovery, I think it's on a more personal base, right? It's not in a personal level. I had to see, for example, in terms of my bodybuilding, I'm very used to forcing myself to work out, sometimes overtrain a little bit.
Right.
So I think COVID actually allows me to rediscover my body in a very different way. In a sense that I can actually relax a little bit, and you don't need to keep your 6 abs 24/7. So sometimes it could be a bit loosened, sometimes you have to relax yourself so that you can actually grow, right, in terms of muscles. So I used to be training very hard, and also teaching people training really hard, eating only my meals, and being very straight with my daily routines. And because of that, I actually lose a lot of I lose a lot of socialization during the process. So I don't really socialize with people a lot. I mainly socialize at the gym, but not outside the gym. Right, so COVID actually allows me, first of all, to rediscover my body, that I can actually relax it a little bit, and then it could still grow. And eventually, of course, I won't say, I'm a little bit lazy even right now. If compared to before COVID.
Yeah, the most intense period, right?
Yes, but I am still growing.
Okay.
Right, and I am in an actually healthier state, mentally and physically. So I think that's something good for me during, for this COVID, that I can actually learn about something that I would never really, experiment, if it's normal time. And at the same time also, because of COVID, alongside with online, training programs or online, teaching or whatever, I also realized that, actually allows me this chance to actually reconnect with people whom, I just not used to connect with, right? Okay. So, friends that I'm not someone who would, just normally call up a friend, or randomly call up someone and talk to, just random stuff, right, to someone. So, but then COVID is, during this long period of lockdown, it actually allows me to reconnect with people whom and reconnect people in an active way, right? Try to see, and I feel like I am much more compassionate as well, because during the COVID, I know some of my friends, maybe get laid off, they lose their financial support or things like that. They may encounter a lot of mental struggle, because of, the limited space that we're living in, a lot of mental stress, that kind of stuff. COVID actually allows us to be able to talk about these issues through online, through phone, which is not something that is very intimidating. Sometimes people will feel like, talk to someone face to face directly about my problems or my stress or my difficulties is something really, really difficult.
Okay, so one last question or topic in relation to what you have said just now in terms of using your phone or not having personal contacts, social media. According to a lot of researchers, during COVID, social media actually played a very important role in terms of keeping people in touch, at least virtually together. And the whole thing about our project this time is actually we have kind of like a subtopic, how to be apart together simultaneously. So can you share with us your practice of using social media? What's your view about social media, especially during the pandemic?
I can recall during the lockdown, every week my phone will remind me how much I have used, how much more time I have used on my social media. I mainly use like Instagram on my own, and I felt like, it's a very important channel for a lot of people. Not necessarily for me, but for a lot of people, I think it's a very important channel to actually, speak up and open up themselves, right? So normally we do see a lot of when we see social media, it's always about putting yourself in the best outfit, putting yourself in the best body shape, that kind of thing, right? But I also see at the same time, especially within the LGBT community, I do see there are a lot more people opening up their vulnerability during COVID and actually encourage others to actually open up as well, and create that, and also create that kind of networking, right, with people who might feel not so glamorous, not so happy, right, to be able to be together, right, to share the kind of difficulties and problems that they have. So I think social media could actually be something good, right? And I think the other good thing that is a bit not really related to LGBT stuff, but in general, is that when you cannot travel elsewhere, when you have to stay within a space, right? You would actually be much more creative in posting up, in discovering. And a lot of times people go more inwards as well.
Right.
That's what I realized as well. So some of my overseas friends, right? They start to do meditation because of COVID, and they even teach people doing meditation, right? As a way to calm themselves, right? And to also release the kind of mental stress that they're experiencing, maybe living with their families, right? who might not understand the situation or living, in a very, limited, small space, right? And they were unable to go out, things like that. So I think social media does provide, in a very positive way, does provide a networking channel, right, for people to speak out their vulnerabilities, right, and to share their kind of vulnerabilities. So I would say for me, my social media is not used for very personal stuff. So I do post personal, people, friends, but for me, it's not really a space for me to just pour out my, my internal feelings. But I do see, the power of doing that as well, and I appreciate people who would like to do that, right? For me, on the contrary, as I said earlier, I think that social media, especially Instagram, allows me to connect with people with everywhere. So during COVID, especially, I actually encounter more people who just text me or DM me, randomly and privately, in terms of their struggles, right? As an LGBT person, or as someone who aspire to be a bodybuilder, to be to fitness, to be more into the fitness, the struggle and stuff like that. Sometimes they will share with me. So I think that is also kind of a channel, right, to let people to just share their vulnerabilities without having too much risk of I don't know. Sometimes people will feel a lot of risk, right, when they have to talk to you face to face.
Right.
I also think that I always think that social media gave us this opportunity to be able to tell people things that we are not used to tell people, right, tell you about. So I think that is something that I find. Of course, social media is good, and it's not because of social media, and not only on Instagram, but I think other communication tools like WhatsApp, Signal, right? All this enables me. It actually enables it because of that. It enables me to be conducting again my own training workshop for transgender people. Right. So that's what I've been doing recently. So now with the COVID being better, so we actually restart the training workshop exclusively just for transgender or non-binary people. So mainly at the beginning we just use like WhatsApp, right, and social media to group some people who might be interested in that, and then we start doing physical. So I think physical training. So I think social media also enables us really to connect, right, and then the connection could also extend beyond just online, and then we'll go offline, and then we can do like I've been conducting weekly training workshops for my trans folks, training them and teaching them, skills of being at the gym, and to provide a inclusive space, safe space for them to work out at least for a pleasant evening a week. So yeah, so I think that's all.
Impressive. On a closing note, now during the pandemic, most people are kind of like immobile, unable to fly. But then you actually are going to choose the other way around. You are actually going to leave Hong Kong to the US to pursue your PhD. So can you tell us, as a final note, your future plans, maybe not only in relation to academia, but other things as well, in terms of, for example, bodybuilding and also your advocacy work?
So yeah, so I think one or two. So actually, at the beginning of COVID, I did make a promise to myself, right? That promise was that, and it's also something that I really want to do, because I felt like back to around 2 years ago, I felt like now that Hong Kong has more younger voices in terms of LGBT advocacy,
right.
And there are actually more people who identified as openly and proudly identified as gender fluid. So I felt like my job is over here, kind of. As a pioneer, as something that opens up, and start the conversation of gender fluidity. So I felt like maybe around 2 years ago, I felt like my job is kind of done here. So and my next stage was to I always want to bring things more global. So as an Asian, Asian, whether it's an Asian athlete or as an Asian advocate, I would like to be able to bring our voices, right, to more in a more global sense, So I felt like, in Hong Kong, I've started up something meaningful, and then there are people who will continue what I have been doing. So I think, I think I'm all good here. And the younger kids, they're actually much more energetic. They have much more better ideas, when connecting with people and when organizing activities and stuff like that. They're much more creative than we do. We are like, OC fish, right? So like we're doing boring stuff for them. So I think, and they're able to mobilize really young generation who will come out, and talk about themselves, being themselves. So so I think, for me, I'm looking for something more global. So that's also one of the reasons that I'm envisioning myself to able to bring more Asian voices, right, to, let's say, America, or to basically to everywhere, different parts in the world. So recently I have been doing a project with I would say it's more like a global project, right? So we're also working on women's rights, and especially women's menstrual rights. So or menstruators' menstrual rights, to be general. So I had to do a campaign, on the menstrual rights for all people. So I'm also looking forward to have more projects that could connect not only me with Hong Kong, but also me with a more global sense. So that's my ambition, right? So alongside with pursuing my academic career, I would also, my proposal for my PhD is also something in relation to Asian voices, right? To Asian visibility and Asian gender fluidity. So so these are things that, these are my upcoming ambitions. So I want to bring myself in the more global stage. And I think my story is unique enough to make some voices. So that's my next stage and next plan.
Okay. All right. Before we end, I know a lot of our audience here might be also belonging to underrepresented or underprivileged groups who might be still suffering because of the pandemic. So any word of wisdom that you can give them as a final takeaway? I know it's a challenging question. I caught you by surprise, right?
No, it doesn't cause me butterflies, but let me think. It's always that kind of ending, but I always hate that ending. That's always, my always first motto of myself is really to be who you are, right? To be yourself, to be who you are, no matter what kind of circumstances, what kind of outside circumstances you are experiencing, right? So even, for COVID, so a lot, of course, we do suffer a lot of different types of struggle because of COVID, or more intensifying, right? Different kinds of struggles during COVID. But I do think that, as long as you are true to yourself, and then you are not afraid, first of all, you have to know who you are, right? And then this have to go inwards, right? So you have to go inwards to know and find out who you really are. And once you do, just follow that, just follow your heart to be who you are. And eventually, all these outside circumstances that you may think it was a limitation would become a possibilities. Right? So for example, for myself, right? So I have always been wanting to study my PhD. For 6 years ago, I've been working for 6 years. So 6 years ago, there were a lot of different kinds of hurdles that prevents me from, actually applying. And I never thought of I would be applying on this year, and it's of course of all the other circumstances that allows me to do that and do that successfully. But I also, at the same time, I also would never imagine that I have been, with these 6 years, I was actually able to create something and contribute something to the LGBT community in a way that, people would take stuff that I've done as something useful for their own advocacy. So I think I've never thought of promoting gender fluidity. It was actually around 6 years ago. was actually a very, raw idea. So I said, I just said, maybe I should try this. I never know how it would lead, but then eventually it leads to something good. So I always think that, following your heart, at that time, and following things that you think is right, eventually they will create all kinds of circumstances that actually benefit you more. If I can choose again, I would also choose the same. I would choose not to have a PhD. Right now, if I do a PhD right after my master's degree like 6 years ago, I'm now a professor, I guess. But but with that time gap, I actually learned something much more. And not to say I won't be able to pursue, my professional career in bodybuilding if I had not had this 6 years. So, you always, as long as you follow your heart, right, you would always find the path that belongs to you. So, but I mean, most people, they're so afraid of, they know what they want, but they're just afraid of, breaking maybe some boundaries that they have, maybe some, expectations, right, of others that they felt like they have to, get along with, right? So, and then eventually they just choose to give up being themselves, right? But if you are able to find back who you are and just be who you are, no matter what circumstances, and just forget all those, difficulties and stuff like that. Just, trust your dreams, so you will always be able to achieve that.
Thank you, Siufung, for all the insights and inspiration.
Thank you so much for having me here as well.
Yeah. Why don't we say goodbye to everyone?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye-bye.